In this lecture, we're going to learn set notation, interval notation, and we'll learn how to graph inequalities. I'd first like to start with an example. Let's graph the set of all points on a number line that are less than the number 3. So the first thing I need to do is to draw a number line. So let's go ahead and do that. I need a reference point, so I'll put a 0 here. Let's just go out a few. 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe I'll go in the negative direction a couple points. Now these arrows out here represent that the number line goes on forever in either direction. So there's my number line. Now I'll read the example again. It says, graph the set of all points on a number line that are less than 3. Well, here's the number 3. I need to graph all the points that are less than 3, which means I need to include all the points to the left of 3. And I'll put a solid arrow here indicating that this goes on forever. So here's all points that are less than 3. But what are we going to do at 3? What symbol are we going to use there? Well, notice it says here that we're not going to include 3. The problem asks us to find all the numbers that are less than 3. Well, 3 is not less than 3, so we cannot include that number. So what we're going to use is an open parenthesis here to represent that we're not going to include the number 3. Now notice, what we really have here is an interval of numbers. We have infinitely many numbers, and we need a way to describe that symbolically. This will be known as interval notation. And I'll write the interval notation for this example. When we write an interval, we always write the interval from left to right. Now notice on the left, we're going on forever. Now this is going to indicate negative infinity. We can't ever get to negative infinity, so we're going to have an open parenthesis. So that's the left portion of my interval. So we need the numbers from negative infinity all the way to 3, not including the 3. So there is the interval notation for this problem. There's another way to represent this same solution, and that would be in set notation. Okay? We'll start with a squiggly bracket to represent a set. I'll just write it out for you here, and then I'll explain what this means. The set notation is read like this. The set, that's what that symbol means, of all x. This little vertical segment, line segment, that means such that. So we have the set of all x such that x is less than 3. Okay, so given a problem like this, when we have a kind of an inequality situation, I want all numbers x less than 3, I could represent it 3 different ways. I can represent it on a number line, in interval notation, and in set notation. When you're doing your homework problems, oftentimes the book will say, put your solution in interval notation, or graph the solution, or it may say, represent your solution in set notation. So it's really important that you get a good feel for all 3 of these ways to represent a solution. Let's go ahead and do another example. How about we write this set in interval notation? Now let's see if we can read what that says. Remember, the starting point here of the bracket represents the set of all x. So what I'm doing is I'm just writing exactly what this notation means. So the set of all x, remember the little vertical line segment means such that x is greater than or equal to negative 2. Okay? And we want to write the interval notation for this set. The first thing I like to do is just graph it. It doesn't ask us to graph it, but sometimes it's easier to find the interval notation once you draw a graph of the situation here. Let's see, I need the set of all x's that are greater than or equal to -2. Well, there's -2. Since I want all numbers greater than -2, means I need to go to the right. Now, what's going to happen at the -2? Well, it says that x can be greater than or equal to a -2. So I want to include this point. And the way we're going to include this point is with a square bracket. The square bracket represents that we're going to include the point -2. Remember earlier, in our earlier example, we did not want to include this point, so we had an open bracket, or an open parenthesis. Okay? When we're going to include it, we're going to have this closed bracket, oftentimes called a closed bracket or a closed parenthesis. So the problem asked us then to find the interval notation. Well, now it's pretty easy to see. Remember, on the interval notation, I always want to write the interval from left to right. My left endpoint is the -2, and since I include the -2, I need that closed bracket there. There is no right endpoint. It goes on forever to the right, so which means we're going to go to positive infinity, and the infinities are always an open bracket. So the set notation converts to this in interval notation. All right, let's try one more. Okay, write an interval notation and graph. Let me go ahead and put the curly braces in there so you can see them better. Let's graph the set of all x such that x is greater than or equal to -3 and x is less than 5. Okay, well, the best thing to do is first graph it. So again, I'll put a number line up there. -3 is right here, and 5 is right there. Those are our 2 points that we're concerned about. Now, it says here that I want to graph the set of all x such that x is greater than or equal to -3, which means I need to go to the right of -3. But I also have to be concerned that I need all values of x that are less than 5, so that means I need to go this way. Okay. So again, the important thing is what happens at the endpoints. Well, notice x can equal a -3. So just like the previous example, I have to include a square bracket on that endpoint. Now the right endpoint says x is strictly less than 5, so that means I need an open parenthesis there. So notice, I have all numbers that are strictly in between -3 and 5, but we're going to include the -3. So the interval notation is simply from left, -3, to the right endpoint, 5, and we're not going to include the right. Okay. So if you practice some of these set notations and inequalities, you should have no problem whatsoever. If you do get into some trouble, go see your instructor or focus group leader.